This child knelt in the mud and cried out to God for a miracle capable of changing the course of a nation. In the forgotten heart of a remote village, where tradition and faith intertwined with the rhythms of nature, the story of Luke was born, a child with a serene gaze and courage that surpassed his tender age. His face, illuminated by innocence, hid an ancestral wisdom that few adults in the place could understand. The community lived immersed in difficulties, struggling daily against the aridity and the incessant drought that plagued the region for long cycles of suffering. Children of the land, the inhabitants carried on their shoulders an existence marked by simplicity, but also by the strength of a people who, even amidst losses, kept the flame of an ancestral faith burning. A faith that connected them to the land and to the natural. Cycles that had governed their lives since time immemorial. On the faces aged prematurely by the relentless sun, silent stories of resilience were revealed with each new dawn. Luke was the son of Helen, a seamstress with skillful hands and a heart vibrant with generosity. Her calloused hands joined not only scraps of fabric but also destinies, sewing hopes into each piece she produced. John, his father, was a tireless farmer who battled against nature to ensure the sustenance of his family. He would wake up even before the sun showed its first rays, and only return when the stars already dominated the night sky. In his rough hands, he carried the weight of his tools and the lightness of hope for better days. Little Luke demonstrated, even in childhood, a rare sensitivity and an intimate connection with the elements that governed life in the village. While other children played with simplicity, he observed the world with eyes that seemed to see beyond the visible. He spent hours contemplating the horizon, as if he could decipher secret messages in the scarce clouds that rarely brought rain. His mother often found him talking to the wind or smiling at the stones on the path, as if they were telling him stories from ancient times. During a scorching summer afternoon, when the sun beat down on the earth with an intensity that seemed intent on extinguishing any trace of life, hope faded among the faces marked by weariness and resignation. The kind, suffocating heat trapped people in their simple homes, while the thin cattle sought shelter under trees almost bare of leaves. The sky, an almost painful blue in its intensity, showed not a single sign of the rain so longed for by all. That day, while playing in the vicinity of an old forgotten well, Luke came across an area of thick, sticky mud that had emerged from an isolated corner of the field. It was a strange phenomenon, considering the drought that dominated the region. That small patch of dampness seemed to defy the implacable logic of the dry spell, like a living contradiction amidst the desolate scenery. Guided by a mysterious impulse and an inner strength that transcended the innocence of his 8 years, the boy felt a silent calling, an inaudible whisper that came from the depths of the earth. Without thinking twice, without fearing staining his clothes already worn from use, Luke knelt in the mud. He let the cold, damp touch fill his gestures of absolute surrender. His small knees sank into that dark mass while his hands reverently touched the wet surface. The boy's eyes closed, and his face took on an expression of profound peace. He seemed to be in perfect communion with something greater, invisible to ordinary eyes. This simple act, seemingly trivial, was full of symbolic meaning. It echoed, a deep, silent prayer, as if the boy sought to connect with something larger and beyond what the eyes could see. Time seemed suspended while Luke remained motionless, kneeling in the mud, his small body in contrast to the vastness of the dry landscape. An old shepherdess passing by with her thin goats was the first to witness that unusual scene. Her eyes, tired from age, saw in the boy's gesture something that transcended common understanding. For her, it was not just a child playing, but an ancestral ritual being revived through childhood innocence. The shepherdess, known as Aunt Josephine, did not interrupt the sacred moment. Silently, she watched from a distance, feeling a shiver run down her aged spine. Something was happening there, something that her decades of life allowed her to recognize as extraordinary, even without understanding its exact nature. When Luke finally stood up, his face was serene, but his eyes shone with a different light, as if they had contemplated hidden secrets in the bowels of the earth. Little by little, the account of this act spread among the inhabitants. Aunt Josephine's. Words, though simple, carried the weight of conviction. "I saw Helen's boy talking to the earth," she told the neighbors, who listened with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. In a small village, where news traveled faster than the dry wind, soon everyone was talking about the strange behavior of John's son. Transforming Luke into the central figure of a nascent legend, the oldest residents began to attribute to his conduct the ability to invoke miraculous changes. Some laughed, others disbelieved, but many, especially the elders, guardians of traditions, saw in that gesture echoes of ancient beliefs, of almost forgotten rituals that their ancestors practiced to beg for mercy from the heavens in times of drought. As the days passed, something extraordinary began to happen. The inhabitants began to notice unexpected events that defied logic and rekindled faith in what seemed mythical. First, in places previously ravaged by drought, small puddles of water appeared that gradually multiplied and increased. It was as if the earth, touched by the boy's reverence, responded with a long-forgotten generosity. This phenomenon was accompanied by the awakening of the old well near the place where Luke had knelt. The well, which had been devoid of water for years, began to gush again abundantly and freshly. The crystal-clear water emerged from the depths of the earth, providing relief to the parched fields and offering a new opportunity for the rebirth of the crops. The most skeptical sought rational explanations. Perhaps rains in the distant mountains had fed the aquifers. Perhaps it was just a coincidence, one of those whims of nature that appear and disappear without apparent explanation. But for many, especially for those whose hearts were open to the possibilities of the inexplicable, there was no doubt. It was a miracle, interpreted as nature's response to Luke's sincere surrender. The news spread like a wave of hope that touched not only the hearts of the elderly and those who had already lost faith, but also awakened the curiosity of the young. These, normally so eager to leave the village in search of opportunities in the big cities, now saw in that occurrence the possibility that the world could be transformed by the power of the Spirit and devotion. Helen, seeing her son at the center of so much attention, felt a mixture of pride and worry. She knew the purity of Luke's soul, but she feared that the expectations of others could be too heavy a burden for such small shoulders. John, a man, a few words, observed everything with respectful silence. In the evenings, after work, he would sit with his son and look at the stars, as if seeking in them confirmation of something he already sensed. Among the inhabitants, Mrs. Matilda stood out as the elder who guarded the long-forgotten traditions and rituals. Over 90 years old, her wrinkled skin was like a map of the difficulties and joys that life had given her. Her eyes, though clouded by age, maintained a gleam of ancestral wisdom. With a life marked by losses and challenges, she had become the keeper of the people's stories, symbolizing the wisdom accumulated by generations. Upon hearing about Luke's act and the subsequent changes, Mrs. Matilda felt her old heart quicken. She asked to be taken to the place where the boy had knelt. Leaning on her carved wooden cane, she examined the area with eyes that saw beyond the physical. She touched the mud with trembling fingers and, to the surprise of those present, knelt down with difficulty, repeating the boy's gesture. As she stood up, helped by willing hands, her face shone with a quiet certainty. "This boy," she said in a weak but firm voice, "awakened what was sleeping. He reminded the earth what it had forgotten, that we are its children and not its masters." Interpreting Luke's act as a harbinger of profound change, Mrs. Matilda encouraged the community to revive the values of solidarity and love for one's neighbor. In impromptu meetings in the shade of the only leafy tree in the central square, she guided the residents to see in the recovery of nature a mirror of their own inner regeneration. "It is not only the water that returns," she said, while everyone listened in respectful silence. "It is our ability to believe that is being restored. It is our connection with all that is sacred that is being rekindled." Through her words and the ancient traditions passed down from father to son, the elder consolidated the idea that genuine faith and connection with the land were the foundations for a collective rebirth. Her voice, though frail, carried the weight of lived experience, transforming the tragedy of the drought into a lesson about the inexorable power of hope. The phenomenon that occurred in the village soon crossed local borders. Like migratory birds, the news flew beyond the mountains and valleys that surrounded that small, forgotten piece of the world. Journalists from neighboring towns were the first to arrive, attracted by the reports of the mud miracle, as it began to be called. Their cameras captured images of the revived well, the small ponds formed in previously parched land, and of course of Luke, who faced the sudden fame with the same serenity with which he had faced the mud. Soon, the phenomenon gained national dimensions. Governors who barely knew how to locate the village on maps now expressed interest in visiting the place. Spiritual leaders of various denominations offered interpretations for what had happened, each through the lens of their own faith. Scholars, skeptical by training, planned expeditions to investigate whether there was a scientific explanation for the sudden return of water in a region ravaged by drought. The legend of the child who knelt in the mud became a symbol of national renewal. What was once just a local story now provoked debates about the relationship between man and nature, between tradition and modernity, and about the importance of maintaining faith even in times of extreme difficulty. The act that, at first glance, might be seen merely as an innocent demonstration of childhood curiosity, revealed itself as a powerful movement capable of inspiring the reconstruction of a people's mentality. The nation, accustomed to solving its problems through bureaucratic and pragmatic artifices, was confronted with the notion that true strength resided in simplicity and in the recognition of the transformative potential that lies in sincere surrender to the unknown. On television programs, experts debated the phenomenon with the seriousness of those discussing matters of state. Some argued that there were perfectly rational explanations for what had occurred, perhaps a change in the region's rainfall patterns, perhaps the accidental discovery of a previously unknown underground aquifer. Others maintained that, regardless of the scientific explanation, the true miracle lay in the impact the story had on people, in its ability to renew hope in such needy times. As the news spread, notable debates arose in forums, churches, and community meetings, questioning the role of faith in social life and the influence of nature on the human soul. At universities, professors and students discussed whether Luke's story might not be a powerful metaphor for the necessary reconnection between human beings and the natural environment, so deteriorated by the excesses of modernity and consumerism. Reports of the miraculous effects reached neighboring towns, and the village, once forgotten, began to be visited by the curious and the devout. They came from all parts of the country, some traveling for days, just to witness the miracle and perhaps find in their own lives a remnant of hope. They brought empty bottles to take some of the water from the miraculous well. They touched the ground where Luke had knelt, as if seeking to absorb through their skin the energy that emanated from that place. Spiritual leaders saw in Luke's act a call to humility and reconnection with the sacred, while governors wondered how to apply the lessons of solidarity and surrender in policies that promoted unity and the common good. It was as if, suddenly, the simple story of a child and a simple gesture had the power to make an entire nation rethink its values and priorities. What this child teaches us, declared a renowned theologian in an interview that was widely publicized, is that true wisdom often resides in simplicity, that perhaps we have strayed too far from the primordial sources that nourish not only our bodies, but also our souls. An eminent scientist, after visiting the village and conducting preliminary analyses of the water and soil, admitted before the cameras, "There are phenomena that science cannot yet fully explain. This does not mean that there is no natural explanation, but that perhaps our current understanding is limited. What we see here is an invitation to scientific humility." Little Luke, at the center of this storm of attention, maintained the same serenity that characterized him before all the fame. He continued to help his father in the fields, now invigorated by the abundant water, and his mother with household chores. In the few interviews he gave, always accompanied by his parents, he answered with the disconcerting sincerity of childhood. "Why did you kneel in the mud that day?" a journalist from a major television channel asked him. "Because the earth was crying," Luke replied, with the simplicity of someone explaining the obvious. And when someone cries, you should stay close. Shouldn't you? This answer, in its profound simplicity, ran through the country like lightning, touching hearts that had long been closed to the possibility of the extraordinary. It was as if ancestral wisdom, lost in the meanders of modern life, found a new channel of expression in the voice of a child. Within this context of changes and rediscoveries, Luke's story also became a lesson in silent leadership and social transformation without the need for grand speeches. The boy's small gesture, surrendering to the mud as if imploring for the healing of a wounded earth, reminded everyone that true change began within the heart, and that the strength to overcome the most arduous challenges resided in a simple act of faith. For communities facing their own droughts, whether literal, like the lack of water, or metaphorical, like the scarcity of hope and solidarity, Luke's story offered a new paradigm. It was no longer necessary to wait for solutions to come from above, from distant governments or powerful entities. Transformation could begin with a simple gesture of reconnection, with a return to the essential humility that reminds us of our interdependence with all that exists. The miracle that shocked the nation taught that, by letting go of our limitations and embracing the essence of our humanity, it is possible to bring about a change that extends far beyond the barriers of time and space. It was an invitation to a collective awakening, to a new way of being in the world and relating to it. In the village, the changes were not limited to the return of water. A new atmosphere hung over the simple houses and dirt streets. Neighbors, who had barely greeted each other before, now shared meals and stories. Young people who had planned to leave in search of a better future in the big cities reconsidered their decisions, seeing possibilities where they had previously only seen limitations. The crops, invigorated by the abundant water, began to bear fruit in quantities never before seen. The green, a color almost forgotten in that drought-stricken landscape, now spread like a blanket of hope over the fields. The song of birds, once rare, became the constant soundtrack of the days that followed. Helen, seeing her son transformed into a national symbol, remained the same simple and dedicated woman. One quiet afternoon, while sewing in the shade of the porch, she asked Luke, "Son, with all this fame, with all these important people wanting to talk to you, don't you feel different? Don't you feel special?" Luke, who was playing with small stones on the dirt floor, looked up at his mother. His gaze remained clear, like the water that now gushed generously from the old well. "Mom," he replied with the same disconcerting sincerity as always, "everyone is special. It's just that some have forgotten." Helen felt tears in her eyes upon hearing those simple and profound words. In them resided the essence of the miracle that had transformed not only the village, but an entire nation. The recognition of the sacredness inherent in every being, every gesture, every moment. John, returning from the fields with his tools on his shoulders, heard his son's answer and smiled. A man of few words, he expressed his love and pride through simple gestures. A hand on the shoulder, a knowing look, a discreet smile. At that moment, his heart overflowed with gratitude for having been blessed with a son who, in his innocence, was capable of teaching lessons that many take a lifetime to learn. Mrs. Matilda, the elder guardian of traditions, spent her days observing the changes with the serenity of someone who had already seen many cycles come to an end. For her, the miracle was not just the return of water, but the renewal of faith and hope she saw in the eyes of her fellow villagers. It was as if the village had awakened from a long sleep, rediscovering its own soul. "This boy," she told those who gathered to hear her words of wisdom, "did not bring the miracle from outside. He merely reminded us of the miracle that was always within us, waiting to be recognized." In its profound simplicity, this was perhaps the most important lesson that emerged from Luke's story, that true miracles are not supernatural events that defy the laws of nature, but rather moments of reconnection with the essential truths that have always been present, just waiting to be rediscovered. As the months passed, the fame of the mud boy gradually diminished, as is natural in a world eager for new stories and sensations. The journalists no longer appeared so frequently. The scholars had published their articles and moved on to other research subjects. The curious found new curiosities to satisfy. But the legacy of what had happened remained. The village, once forgotten, was now a symbol of renewal and hope. Its waters continued to flow, its crops to prosper, its community to strengthen the bonds that united them. And, most importantly, Luke's story continued to be told, passing from mouth to mouth, from heart to heart, inspiring others to find within themselves the courage for simple gestures of faith and surrender. In summary, the premise of the story about the child who knelt in the mud and the miracle that shocked an entire nation blends elements of faith, simplicity, and transformation. It rescues the importance of revisiting primordial values, propagating the idea that reconnection with nature and trust in the power of the human spirit are engines capable of rebuilding entire communities. The symbolism of the act of kneeling in the mud reflects the desire for renewal and the belief in the redemptive power of sincere gestures, transforming even the most arid landscapes into a scenario of hope and abundance. Thus, the legend of Luke not only alters the reality of a people but also propagates a universal message that overcoming adversity involves recognizing our own ability to transform the world when we open our hearts to faith and to selfless love. This narrative reiterates the importance of preserving traditions and staying true to one's roots, emphasizing that the most powerful miracle is the one that occurs within ourselves and radiates to the collective coexistence, inspiring an entire nation to walk towards a future of hope and renewal. And so, in the simplicity of a boy and the strength of a gesture, we find the eternal truth that all great spiritual traditions try to teach us. That true transformation begins in the humility of recognizing our interdependence with all that exists. That when we kneel before the mystery of life, reconnecting with our deepest roots, we open the way for miracles to happen, not only around us, but mainly within our hearts. Luke, in his childlike wisdom, did not ask for recognition or fame. His gesture was born of the purity of a soul that had not yet forgotten its divine origin, its essential connection with the web of life. And perhaps this is the true miracle, remembering who we really are, in a world that constantly invites us to forget. In every drop of water that now blessed that land once ravaged by drought, in every plant that blossomed under the now generous sun, in every smile that illuminated faces previously marked by despair, echoed the silent message of the boy who knelt in the mud. That hope never dies completely, that renewal is always possible, that miracles await only the right moment to manifest, when we are ready to receive them with open hearts and receptive souls. And you who now know this story may wonder, where are the dry places in your own life that yearn for the touch of renewal? Perhaps you question, what are the muds in your path in which you could kneel, not in defeat, but in reverence and surrender? Because the miracle that transformed that forgotten village and shocked an entire nation is not confined to that specific time and place. It is available to all who, like Luke, are willing to recognize the sacredness of life and surrender to it with the pure heart of a child. Years passed since the day Luke knelt in the mud. The boy grew up, became a strong young man, but never lost that special spark in his eyes, that deep connection with the earth and its mysteries. While many expected him to follow some formal, spiritual path, perhaps becoming a religious leader or a guru, Luke chose to remain in simplicity. He continued to work the land alongside his father, now aged, but with a renewed purpose in every gesture. The waters that sprang forth on that miraculous day never dried up. The village, once condemned to oblivion, became an oasis of life in the middle of the semi-arid region. The crops thrived, attracting people from other places who came in search of a better life, a chance for a fresh start. What was once a place of departure was now a place of arrival, of renewal, of hope. Helen, Luke's mother, established a sewing cooperative with other women that produced pieces inspired by the story of the miracle. In each embroidery, in each carefully sewn patch, they visually told the story that had already become a legend. Their creations were sought after by people from all over the country, not only for their beauty, but for the meaning they carried. John, once a man bent by the weight of hard work and constant disappointments, now walked upright with the pride of someone who sees his work bear fruit. In the evenings, when the family gathered around the table for a meal, his gratitude was silent but profound, manifesting in the gleam in his eyes as he watched his son, his wife, and the community that flourished around them. Mrs. Matilda, the elder guardian of traditions, lived to see the complete transformation of the village. In her last days, surrounded by generations of descendants, she recounted and recounted the story of the boy and the mud, ensuring that the memory of that extraordinary event remained alive. When she finally passed away, she was buried near the place where it all began, as was her wish. On the simple tombstone, just one phrase: "Here lies one who saw the earth reborn." The story of the miracle was documented in books, films, and documentaries. Academics from various fields, anthropologists, sociologists, theologians, environmental scientists, continued to study the phenomenon, each through the lens of their discipline. Some sought rational explanations, others explored the spiritual aspects, but all agreed on one point: something profoundly transformative had occurred in that place. The well from which the water began. To gush became a place of pilgrimage. People came from afar, bringing their pains, their particular droughts, in search of renewal. It was not only the physically ill who sought healing, but also those whose aridity was in their souls, in hearts hardened by the challenges of modern life. Luke, even in adulthood, remained out of the spotlight that occasionally still turned to him. He received distinguished visitors and anonymous pilgrims with the same simple kindness, never claiming credit for the miracle. "I just knelt," he would say when pressed to explain. The earth did the rest. In a small room of the house he built for himself near his parents' house, Luke kept some of the countless letters he received from people touched by his story. They were moving testimonies of personal transformations, of moments of awakening, of profound reconnections with what is essential. He read them on silent nights, not out of vanity, but as a reminder of the responsibility he carried to be a channel for something greater than himself. The village became a model of sustainable and harmonious development. Traditional agricultural techniques, almost forgotten in the eagerness for progress, were rescued and improved. The community learned to live in balance with natural cycles, understanding that true abundance comes from respecting the earth and its limits. Schools from other regions organized excursions so that their students could learn about the history of the place and its lessons. The children, with their natural openness to the extraordinary, intuitively understood what many adults took time to assimilate: that great miracles often manifest through the simplest gestures when performed with purity of intention. Scientists, who initially came skeptical, seeking to demystify the phenomenon, often left transformed by the experience. "There are more mysteries between heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy," quoted a renowned geologist in his report, after months of inconclusive studies on the origin of the water that continued to spring forth, seemingly inexhaustibly. In a simple ceremony held on the 10th anniversary of the miracle, a plaque was unveiled in the center of the village's main square. On it, engraved in golden letters, were the words Luke had said as a child: "Because the earth was crying. And when someone cries, you should stay close, shouldn't you?" These words became a mantra for many, a reminder of the sensitivity needed to perceive the suffering around us and the courage to approach it, not with fear or aversion, but with compassion and loving presence. As the world faced increasingly severe environmental challenges, prolonged droughts, devastating floods, climatic imbalances, Luke's story gained new relevance. It was as if that boy, decades ago, had intuited a truth that was now becoming urgent for all of humanity: the need for a profound reconnection with nature, a healing for the wound of separation that had long afflicted the relationship between human beings and their planetary home. Many wondered, what if each of us found our own mud to kneel in? What if, in our daily gestures, we sought that same surrender, that same reverence for the mystery of life? What miracles could spring from such a collective shift in consciousness? But a world increasingly divided by ideologies, beliefs, and conflicting interests, Luke's story offered common ground, a meeting point for different perspectives. It did not matter if someone interpreted it through the lens of religious faith, science, psychology, or deep ecology. Its transformative power remained intact. Its message of hope echoed in diverse hearts. Perhaps this is the greatest legacy of that simple gesture, reminding us that despite all our apparent differences, we share the same essence, the same origin, the same home. And that, when one of us kneels in reverence to the mystery of life, in some mysterious way, we all kneel together. We all participate in that act of surrender. We are all touched by the grace that emanates from it. And so, Luke's story continues to be told, passing from generation to generation, crossing geographical and cultural borders, reminding all who hear it that true miracles are not spectacular events that happen to a chosen few, but latent possibilities in every heart that opens, to the extraordinary present in the ordinary, to the sacred hidden in the everyday, to the abundance that awaits in the seemingly most arid places of our lives.